Welcome to the channel. You are watching Ruslan Belov, and today, as always, we are breaking down the current situation on the Ukrainian front, in detail, without embellishment, and based on real data. But before we get into the analysis, I want to make my traditional request. If you are not yet subscribed to the channel, please do it right now. A subscription is the simplest and most effective way to support the development of this project. Every new subscriber helps the channel grow, reach a wider audience, and keep going. It takes literally a few seconds, but the impact is enormous. Thank you to everyone who is already with us. Ukraine's counter-offensive and the Geneva negotiations. Failure across the board. Let us start with the key political context that directly shapes everything happening on the battlefield. Ukraine's counter-offensive, which was deliberately synchronized with the negotiating process in Geneva, was originally conceived as a pressure tool on the diplomatic track. The idea was straightforward: demonstrate gains on the ground, strengthen positions at the negotiating table, and create the illusion of military capability. However, reality turned out to be entirely different. The counter-offensive did not just stall, it suffered a complete defeat, yielding no strategic results whatsoever. And this raises an obvious question: what now? What happens to the negotiating process when the military card has been played and lost? Zelensky himself provided the answer. According to available information, he told his advisors that negotiations with Russia have reached a dead end and have effectively collapsed. Moreover, Zelensky has instructed his team to develop a comprehensive plan for conducting hostilities through the year 2029. This means that Ukrainian leadership is officially factoring in at least 3 more years of war into its strategic calculations. Alongside this, the commander of Ukraine's National Guard, General Pivnenko, publicly stated that Ukraine is capable of fighting for several more years and has no intention of ceding a single inch of territory. This is the official position, declared from the highest platforms. A perfectly natural question arises, and we address it to our viewers. Is this position realistic? Can Ukraine actually hold out until 2029? Or will Russian forces manage to establish control over the Donetsk, Zaporizhzhia, and Kherson regions before that deadline? Write your opinion in the comments. This is an extremely important topic for discussion. Overview of the front situation, the big picture. And now to the map and the actual state of affairs along the line of contact. Looking at what is happening objectively, there is a persistent sense that the command of Ukraine's armed forces is acting as though it realizes time is running out, resources are dwindling, and everything available must be thrown into battle right now, regardless of the cost. This explains the character of the current Ukrainian counterattacks: chaotic, poorly coordinated, accompanied by massive losses in manpower without any meaningful territorial results. This is not strategy, this is agony. Let us look at the concrete numbers. Over 10 days of the so-called counter-offensive, named after Syrsky, Ukrainian forces lost more than 1,500 fighters killed and wounded. 1,500 people in 10 days, that is an enormous price. And what was achieved at that cost? Essentially nothing. A few small settlements along the line of contact, which can hardly be called strategic objectives, that is the entire result. Yes, one can argue that the attacking side always suffers losses. That is the objective reality of war. That is a fair point. But the problem here is that we are talking about losses without an adequate result, and that is not a tactical setback. It is a strategic miscalculation. Rodinska, an absurd flag provocation and its consequences. Particular attention deserves an episode that took place the day before in the Rodinska area. A Ukrainian special reconnaissance group attempted to break into Rodinska carrying a Ukrainian flag, with the obvious intention of planting it in plain sight and declaring the city liberated. Think about it for a moment. Why would you do this? For a propaganda effect on social media, for a pretty picture for Ukrainian television channels, for the illusion of victory to show to an audience that has grown weary of war. This action has no military logic whatsoever. It is purely performative. And the outcome was entirely predictable. The fighters were killed. Footage showing the bodies of Ukrainian soldiers and an abandoned Ukrainian flag spread across open-access platforms. A tragedy born of a senseless order. This episode vividly illustrates the overall character of current Ukrainian military operations. Hastily mobilized fighters are thrown into battle for image-building purposes, paying with their lives for the public relations stunts of their commanders. The Voda Mine No. 2, a tactical success for Russian forces. Now let us talk about real military developments. In the Rodinska area, the situation is unfolding as follows. Despite Ukrainian counterattacks, Russian units continue to methodically expand their zone of control on the flanks. A few days ago, I told you about how Russian fighters, advancing from the city, reached the second Vodyanskaya mine. Yesterday, toward evening, confirmation arrived. Russian forces have managed to establish a foothold at this facility. The mine is not yet fully under Russian control, fighting continues, but the very fact of holding those positions represents a significant tactical success. Why does this matter? Because for an extended period, Russian forces had been unable to meaningfully push the front line away from the city itself. The mine is a commanding position, and capturing it opens up the ability to apply pressure westward, toward Shevchenko. Once Russian forces firmly consolidate at the mine and bring it under full control, this will automatically change the situation around Rodinsky itself. Ukrainian forces will no longer have the luxury of staging flag-planting raids on the city. They will have to concentrate all their resources on holding their own positions to prevent the center group from breaking through to Dobre Pole from the south. Belitzk, a logistical trap. To the north, in the Belitzk area, the situation for Ukrainian forces is developing in an even more dramatic fashion. Every single logistical route supplying the Ukrainian garrison in the city has been cut. This means Belitzk has effectively found itself in operational encirclement. Supply lines are severed, reinforcements cannot get through, and the evacuation of the wounded is severely hampered. Beyond that, Russian forces have already begun applying direct pressure inside the urban area itself. The fall of Belitzk under full Russian control is a matter of time, and this is another blow to Dobre Pole, one more instrument of pressure on this key hub. A separate word is warranted about the prospects of this direction as spring approaches. For now, the Dobre Pole direction remains difficult. Advances come slowly and at a high cost. This is largely due to seasonal conditions. The absence of foliage strips forces of any concealment, and the ground hampers movement of heavy equipment. But as soon as the green season arrives, the front here will come to life in an entirely different way. We will see different tempos, different opportunities for maneuver, and different results. The Sloviansk Kramatorsk direction, a critical threat for Ukraine. If the Dobre Pole direction, for all its problems, is not yet critical for Ukrainian forces, the Sloviansk Kramatorsk direction already is. It is here, without waiting for the green season, that the South Group is conducting a systematic offensive, methodically bending the Ukrainian defense across a broad stretch from Minkivka to Kryvyi Luki. Minkivka can be considered finished. Russian forces have completed its clearing and are now storming strongpoints in the Holubivka area. If resistance is broken on this line, Russian forces will gain access to the Siversky Donets, Donbas Canal. This will allow Rye-Oleksandrivka to be blockaded from the south, and the distance to Kramatorsk will drop sharply to 10 kilometers. 10 kilometers from Kramatorsk is an entirely different strategic reality. On the northern section of this same direction, fierce fighting is underway for the commanding heights in the Kryvyi Luki area. Even Ukrainian sources acknowledge that this is where the main battles are taking place. The terrain is difficult, elevation changes, quarries, broken ground. One can draw a parallel with the battles for Bilohorivka, which were extraordinarily grueling for Russian forces. Nevertheless, once Russian units drive Ukrainian forces off the heights and establish control over Kryvyi Luki, this will create fundamentally different conditions for further offensive operations. The objective remains the same: Rye-Oleksandrivka, then Mykolaiivka, then Sloviansk, Nikiforivka, and the prospects for Rye-Oleksandrivka. The closest Russian forces currently are to the entry point of Rye-Oleksandrivka is in the Nikiforivka area. Half the distance has been covered. Fighting is underway for the northern part of this settlement. After Nikiforivka, only 2.5 kilometers separate Russian forces from Rye-Oleksandrivka. Based on the current pace and momentum, the Nikiforivka question will be resolved in March, at the latest by the first half of April. Many viewers in the comments are asking, is there any chance of taking Sloviansk this summer? I will answer honestly, no. Taking Sloviansk in 2026 is not a realistic prospect. However, reaching Sloviansk, approaching its outskirts, by August is possible. Let us walk through the logic. Rye-Oleksandrivka will most likely be resolved in March or April. From Rye-Oleksandrivka to the southern outskirts of Mykolaiivka, 3.5 kilometers. If by mid-April we bring Rye-Oleksandrivka under full control, then by June the Russian army will be at Mykolaiivka. And from Mykolaiivka, Sloviansk is just a short distance away. So by late summer, Russian forces could very plausibly be standing at the approaches to Sloviansk. But a different question arises here, a strategic one. Taking Sloviansk from the east and south is extremely difficult. The Kazhenny Torets River stands in the way, and crossing it is a complex military engineering challenge against a fortified defense. A full encirclement and capture of Sloviansk requires support from the north. That means taking back Izium. This cannot be accomplished in the current year, too many parallel tasks, forces too stretched. So the realistic forecast is this. Russian forces will reach Sloviansk this year, but the decisive battles for the city itself, if there is no political settlement, will most likely not occur until 2027. Yes, this is not the most optimistic forecast, but it is an honest and realistic one. It is better to know the truth and understand what to expect than to feed on illusions. In essence, there are two scenarios. Either Ukrainian forces ultimately agree to withdraw from the remaining cities of the Donbass, Sloviansk, Kramatorsk, and others, in which case they will pass under Russian control without large-scale urban combat. Or, if that does not happen, they will have to be taken by storm, and that means at least 2 more years of the hardest possible fighting. Costantinovka, advancing through the urban area. Let us move to Costantinovka. Here, Russian forces continue to build on earlier gains. A reminder, Russian units entered districts close to the central part of the city. Ukrainian sources confirmed advances on the left flank of the settlement. Today, additional confirmed information arrived. Russian forces have managed to expand their zone of control on this section of the front. Whether they will hold these positions, only time will tell. Combat in urban areas is always unpredictable, but the trend is unmistakable. Russian forces are gradually clearing the pocket in the Kostiantinivka area, pushing deeper into it. When this pocket comes fully under Russian control, the fate of Kostiantinivka itself will be sealed. The front line will straighten, and offensive pressure will be applied across the entire line of contact. In parallel, Ukrainian sources are reporting that Ukrainian forces have pushed Russian troops back to the south of Ilyanivka. However, no confirmation of these claims from independent sources has yet arrived, only coloring on Ukrainian mapping platforms. As soon as verified information appears, I will update you immediately. The Kupansk direction, stabilization after Ukrainian attacks. From the Kupansk direction comes news of a somewhat different character. Russian forces have managed to stabilize the front line following a series of Ukrainian counterattacks. Just recently, we were discussing how Ukrainian forces were active here, attempting to push Russian units off a number of positions. Today, pro-Russian sources confirm Russian forces held firm, Ukrainian reserves have been exhausted or redeployed to other sectors, and the offensive activity of Ukrainian forces on this direction has dropped significantly. Active combat operations continue in the areas of Kucherivka, Petropavlivka, Kupiansk-Vuzlovi, Kurilivka, and in Kupiansk itself. However, no meaningful territorial changes in either direction are being recorded at this time. Given that Ukrainian reserves here are depleted, in the near term we should expect the initiative to shift to the Russian side. The Sumy direction, conflicting reports. From the Sumy direction comes confirmed but ambiguous information. Russian forces have significantly expanded their zone of control to the south of Pokrovka and toward the settlement of Mikhailivka. The corresponding territories have been confirmed as under Russian control. At the same time, Ukrainian sources, which we consider fairly reliable, are reporting Ukrainian counterattacks toward Pokrovka and the recapture of part of those territories. The situation remains unclear. The data contradict each other, and no confirmation from neutral sources is available. This direction has already shown a similar dynamic in the past, with settlements changing hands multiple times. Something similar may now be happening with Pokrovka. As soon as verified information becomes available, I will make corrections and report back to you. Political agenda: NATO, the EU, and Hungary. Now let us briefly run through the key political news that directly shapes the broader context of the conflict. Ukraine and NATO, acknowledging the obvious. Zelensky publicly acknowledged what clear-headed observers have been saying for a long time. The path to NATO for Ukraine is closed. According to him, neither the previous nor the current US administration views Ukrainian membership in the alliance as a realistic prospect, rather than a mere declaration. Moreover, Zelensky confirmed that American officials and a number of European officials are conducting talks with Russia on a new document in the NATO-Russia format. We wanted to become part of the alliance, we were ready for it, but the Western position has not changed. What more can we do? Nothing, was his conclusion, a harsh but honest acknowledgement of reality. Brussels maximalism. Meanwhile, the European Union continues to demonstrate a remarkable detachment from reality. The head of European diplomacy, Kaja Kallas, circulated among EU member states a document listing conditions that Russia must fulfill even before full-fledged negotiations can begin. European diplomats themselves describe the document as maximalist, which is a rare level of candor. Among the demands put forward, a symmetric withdrawal of forces from controlled territories, a refusal to legally recognize occupied territories and their demilitarization, an end to disinformation campaigns, cyber attacks, and interference in elections, the withdrawal of Russian forces and nuclear weapons from Belarus, a rejection of blanket amnesty for war crimes with access granted to international investigators, compensation payments to Ukraine, European states and companies, including environmental damages, and, in all seriousness, the democratization of Russia, the holding of elections under international oversight, the release of political prisoners, freedom of the press, and the repeal of the Foreign Agents Law. This list is set to be discussed at the level of EU ambassadors and foreign ministers in Brussels on the 23rd of February. The document will be adopted as Brussels' official negotiating position. One wonders whether its authors understand how far removed all of this is from reality. Sergei Lavrov has already given a full assessment of such initiatives. Nothing needs to be added to his words. Hungary tightens the gas and energy valve. Finally, a piece of news that could have very concrete practical consequences for Ukraine. The Hungarian government has not ruled out the possibility of cutting off deliveries to Ukraine, not only of diesel fuel, which has already been introduced as a retaliatory measure for Kiev's blocking of Russian oil transit through the Druzhba pipeline, but also of natural gas and electricity. This was announced by the head of the Hungarian Prime Minister's office, Gergely Gulyás. According to him, the actions of Ukrainian authorities are unacceptable, and Budapest is prepared to escalate pressure. How painful would this be for Ukraine? The numbers are quite telling. According to full-year 2025 figures, Hungary provided between 40 and 42% of Ukraine's total electricity imports. In December 2025, that share was 41%, and in February 2026, it reached 50%. Exactly half of all Ukrainian electricity imports. On natural gas, in 2025, Hungary covered approximately 45% of import supplies. In January 2026, the share dipped slightly to 38% due to increased deliveries from Poland. But Hungary remains the key gas supplier for Ukraine. In other words, Ukraine is critically dependent on Hungary in energy terms. And yet Ukrainian leadership has been publicly and ostentatiously insulting Orban from high platforms, to the applause of an enthusiastic audience. The result is predictable. The one who was insulted is now pulling the levers. This is a textbook example of what happens when strategic thinking is replaced by populist gestures. That concludes today's briefing. Stay updated, subscribe to the channel, and write your opinion in the comments, especially on the question of whether Ukraine can hold out until 2029. Until next time.